My name is Clara. I live in the upper state of Michigan, and I love to hike and camp along with some hunting. I went out one day with my stepdad to go hunting so we could catch us some deer and whatnot. Once we got to the location where we went to go hunt at, we got out and packed up our gear we had brought from our house. I smelled something foul like a pile of garbage or rotting fish mixed with some really bad body odor. We ignored it as we thought something might be dead laying around nearby. We made our way through the woods onto a beaten down path we had found close by. Once we got quite a ways, we stopped and took a couple of minutes. After we took our small break, we heard a huge crack in the background behind some large bushes. My stepdad instinctively grabbed his sidearm from his holster. And that is when whatever it was growled at us and sped off. Whatever it was sounded huge and very fast. We, of course, ignored it, but hiked even faster to where we needed to go. Once we got there, we set up camp and started to make lunch. We had a hot dog with a side of salad. As we ate, I started to smell that putrid smell again, which almost made me vomit my food back out. I had to pee, so I went off being near dusk. I grabbed my flashlight and a hunting knife to take as protection just in case. I squatted down as I was about to take a pee, until I saw something move off in the distance. Freaked out, I shined my flashlight at whatever it was. I could see orange or red glowing eyes shining as I stared at something, and I started to become even more frightened than I was before. I pulled my pants back up and ran back to the camp. I told my dad about what happened, and he went to check it out. Only after a couple of minutes, I heard a loud scream the direction my dad had run off into. He ran back panicked, real bad with blood oozing down his knee. I asked him what happened, but he stayed silent. He packed up our stuff as fast as he could and walked fast back to the truck. Once we got halfway there, we heard a very loud call from something I've never heard before. At that moment, we started running as fast as we could, nearly tripping over roots until after a couple of minutes or so, we finally made it back to the truck. We packed everything in the back and sped off. We went straight home, and we tried to go straight to sleep. But before that, I saw his knee, which looked like it was hit by a big rock or something. He still hasn't told me what happened, but I do have a very, very bad feeling that he got into a tussle with something out in those woods.
I'm an Australian who has spent most of his life surrounded by the bush. This makes me accustomed to all of the weird noises that may come when night falls. This incident occurred one night at around 2:30 a.m. I was watching YouTube with my cat, who was asleep. All of a sudden, I heard a loud shriek, like you would imagine a howler monkey, cross-human shriek would sound like. My cat's head shot straight up, looking out of my window. His back arched up and he started hissing and acting all aggressive. I have decorative rocks outside my window, so when anything walks in it, you can hear the rocks moving. I heard them moving outside, like a person would walk through them. I slowly got up out of my bed and made a crack in my blind so I could get a better look outside. My blood ran ice cold as I saw it. It was about 6 to 7 feet tall. It was completely naked. It was also completely hairless and its eyes were locked onto mine. Its body turned to face me as well, so I was staring directly at it. We stood like that for what seemed like hours, just keeping each other in our sights. I glanced down at the creature's hands. It had a dead cat clasped into its grip, blood dripping from the body. I locked eyes again with it and noticed the creature had a mouth. I don't know why, but that freaked me out the most. It started to turn away, to walk down my road. I rushed to put my jeans and a shirt on. I reached into my cupboard and pulled out a torch and a knife I always have hidden in my room. I opened up my back door and ran down the road. I saw the thing casually stroll into the bush behind my house. It took me about a minute to summon the courage to enter after it. I walked into the bush with the torch and knife in hand. I heard scuttling behind me. I turned around and my torch illuminated a possum. Freaked out, I told it to bugger off. It stared at me blankly. I turned around and walked for another 500 meters or so. That's when I found the cat's body, mangled all to hell. That made me rethink my previous decision. As I turned to leave, all of a sudden I heard that same shriek. I ran as fast as I could, dropping my torch in the progress. I finally made it to the back door. I opened it and ran straight into my room. My cat was looking at me. I patted and passed out of my bed. I woke up the next morning at 10 and strode out to my kitchen. While I was making my morning coffee, I looked out my window. My jaw dropped, because all along the outside of my wall, there was a deep gash. I called my father, and he came to have a look. He said it looked like when someone drags a screw against someone's car, but this looks too deep to be a screw mark. I thanked him for freaking me out even more. We covered the gash in plaster and went on with our way. I have done some research on what it could possibly be. I kept coming back to the rake, but that is just a creepy story, or at least I thought anyway. I personally think that it was a humanoid creature, but I have no idea what. Thank you for reading this, and if you could help me find out what this is, I would appreciate it.
I just moved to North Dakota to work the oil field business with my friend I'll call Sean. I was initially unsure of what the job entails, but I knew it meant a lot of income, and being able to see and work, and my longtime friend sold me on the deal. As it turned out, I loved the job. 12-hour days and on day shift with the kind of money we were making was the easiest street in my opinion. I mean, basically, all we did during the day was stay on site and make sure the place didn't burn down. The job was perfect. This all came to a halt one day when my boss came to me and asked if I wanted to work night shift instead, and even go around to different sites. We all know, if your boss is asking, it's likely not smart to say no. So, I accepted. Basically, I checked 6 sites, 3 times a night, with 2 hours of downtime between each site check. Now, to give you an idea of the placement of these sites, just imagine sites at least 12 miles apart, sometimes further, in the middle of nowhere, with only old farms and some dirt roads near them for miles. That's how these sites were, and how alone I'd be while out that night. One other thing is winter was just setting in, so we had constant snow and blizzards. Now that you've got a great visual of my situation, I will begin to explain an experience I had while working the night shift. There's one site out of all the sites that is particularly creepy. This site is the farthest one away on my route, and is in the most dimly lit of all of them. Arriving at the said site, I pull up to the pump house, put on my gloves, my hard hat, switching my line on as I do, and step outside. Walking around, I'm careful with my steps as the headlight only illuminates what you're looking at. Everything else is a pitch black, cold, snowy abyss. The thing about the snow is you can tell if anyone has been around or is around, but there were no truck tracks, so I knew I was alone. My usual search goes from left to right, looking closely for leaks or potential leak areas on the tanks, which are roughly 20 feet by 10 feet wide. As I'm coming up on my last tank, I notice what looked like a pair of white tennis shoes dart behind a tank. My first thought is, what would anyone be doing out here without a truck? This made my stomach sink, partially out of confusion, but mostly because I was 20 miles away from civilization, alone, and it was like 15 degrees outside. The thought again crosses my mind. What would any sane person be doing out here without his truck? Slowly, and quite hesitantly, I go toward the tank I saw the shoe from. I'm taking it slow, one step at a time, and I'm beginning to feel on edge at this point. Just when my heart feels like it's about to explode a tiny bit, a white rabbit comes out hopping from the area. I throw my head back, breathe a sigh of relief, and have a laugh of the realization that it was just a bunny. This being the end of the line, I find a place to park soon after and kick back in my seat to relax. You need to understand, sleeping on the job isn't something you're supposed to do. But it happened sometimes, and before I knew it, I passed out. 40 minutes later, my body spazzes awake and I look around to see no one. Needing to pee, I step out. But before I can even step on the ground, I freeze. There are tracks in the snow, leading up to my truck. These aren't rabbit tracks either. They're human-like. They aren't the right size to be mine either. The tracks lead over to the tanks I was checking earlier. I question, who the hell could be out here and why? I began to get that sinking feeling again as I followed the tracks. I made sure to grab the biggest wrench I had from the truck just in case. Whoever was out here, were they crazy? Did they potentially need my help? I wasn't sure, and about 20 feet from the dark tank, I freeze and call out, asking who's there and if they need any help. Silence sets in for a minute, the only sound coming from the snow and the wind blowing it. I feel simultaneous loneliness, and yet, I know I'm potentially being watched. The loneliness is the realization I'm on my own, and if something goes wrong, I'm probably screwed. Trying to set this thought aside, I tried to tell whoever is back there, I'm aware they're there. Still, silence is the only response I get. I walk forward 5 more feet and peer around the tank area. What I see doesn't register immediately, but when it does, I'm in shock. There's blood, and I mean lots of blood. I felt nauseous, but was curious, so I stepped closer. That's when I see an antler. Is it a deer? Finally, I make my way close enough to see a dead deer. Its throat slit and blood everywhere. The thing was, its organs were in clear display as well, and streaming on the snow, so I know the kill was fresh. Someone or something had eviscerated this deer and left it here. Who or what would do this, and why? I turn my attention back to the shoe prints, and while it's obvious there was a lot of shuffling around the deer itself, I'm not convinced, just yet, that whoever was there was responsible for killing the deer. This was then I noticed the shoe prints leading off and back to the tanks. Slowly, extremely hesitantly now, I follow these tracks. I'm shaking, but not from the snow. No, I'm shaking from fear. The tracks themselves appear to be blood red. The tracks lead to a drop-off and I peer off into the distance. When 40 feet away, I see something that makes me damn near shit myself. The thing I see is half of a human face peering back at me from over the hill. The face was old, tattered, with long mangy hair and blood from the nose down. I jumped so hard I fell, but was immediately on my feet seconds later. I threw my stuff into my truck bed, got into my truck, and floored it as far and fast as I could. I was dizzy and couldn't help but think that that thing had been right outside my unlocked truck door, looking at me while I slept at one point. If it didn't already have the deer, would it have done what it did to the deer to me? I never told my company about the person or thing that I saw. I simply told them I noticed the deer and thought it was strange. At which point, they removed the body. An older resident of the area who was on site that day mentioned it looked like a couple coyotes got to it and were trying to drag it out of the predator's sight. I knew better though. I still work with the company. Until this day, I still work nights and have to check in on this site. I'm always in and out in minutes and never linger, nor do I sleep out there.
One rainy night in the middle of May, 2003, my friends and I were hanging out at around 9 p.m. We are Navajo, getting water for the livestock in Sunrise, Arizona. We are having a good time, and Tony was driving. I was on the passenger seat, and John and Cody were sitting in the back seat. We were all telling jokes and cracking up until we reached the windmill. Once we'd arrived, we started the water and waited for it to fill the barrel. While waiting, we decided to go walking around looking at the local cows. Unfortunately, this led to the barrel overflowing, at which point John ran to pull the hose. John is a professional sheep herder, by the way. After the situation was contained, we went back, and at this time, I was going to drive. At least, I believed I was, as when I got into the truck it wouldn't start. I tried several times to start the truck, and even looked under the hood to get it to do anything. Nothing was out of place, so I went back into the truck and tried again. Tony, John, and Cody wanted to go mess with the cows, and so they soon left while I continued to work on the truck. While working on the truck, there was a sudden sound that was so loud that it made me jump. I recollected myself after that, thinking maybe it was just the guys throwing rocks to scare the cows. The moment I started working on the truck, I heard the sound once again. I got out of the truck and yelled for the guys to stop making that sound. Soon after, they started to come back. Once they got back to the truck, I asked them if they were throwing rocks at the windmill. They all said no, at which point, I got chills. When we made our way back to the cows, Tony stuck with me. While chilling with Tony, we all heard the sound again. This time, it was a harder hit. Tony yelled to them and told them to stop doing that. The others didn't answer. Usually, they would reply to him pretty quick. He called them once more, but no one yelled back. We got worried, and we started walking out into the dark looking for them. We called out their names, but no one answered. The only light we had was the moonlight, which kept coming in and out of the clouds as we didn't have any flashlights on us at the time. This made it extremely difficult to see. After about 10 minutes, we finally found them. They were on the ground, almost shivering, and their eyes were wide open. Tony and I thought about the worst that could have happened. We have heard stories about these skinwalkers. We have experienced encounters before, but not like this, or at least not with us out here in the open. We knew what we had to do, but we didn't know if there was only one or a few. Then, we heard something scrambling in the bushes nearby. Tony and I freaked out, as soon after we heard it again, but on our right this time. Soon after that, we heard it on our left, and then in front of us, and then behind us. This all happened in about 3 seconds. We got the chills, to say the least. I knew Tony almost always had some Navajo mountain tobacco or blessing cedar to protect us from the skinwalkers, but he didn't have either of it this time. Tony and I made a run to the truck with the half-naked bodies of Cody and John. We heard the footsteps of something running after us as we made it back to the truck, and we all got back in. The second we slammed the door shut, it got unnaturally silent. Soon after this, the witchcraft that the skinwalkers put on Cody and John seemingly wore off. We were just about to relax when some sickly-looking coyotes jumped onto the hood of the truck. There were 3 creatures that had the body of a coyote, but had a little more human-like features. They could walk on their 4 legs, or just their back 2 legs. They had eyes that were crystal and blood red. They had the smell of dead animals. The smell was so unbearable we all fell back into our seat and started to scream in disgust. The creatures started to sing or chant, and we knew they were speaking in Navajo, but we were so terrified we couldn't even tell what they were saying. This was when some tall, long-haired, furry black creature with crystal-like eyes showed up just outside Tony's window, breathing heavily, with the ugliest face we've ever seen. Tony looked at it, and jumped back so quickly and powerfully that he almost knocked down Cody. The creature blew something like powder through the window onto us. We all started to slow our breathing and calm down, and after a matter of seconds it was quiet, and we all passed out. When we woke up the next day, we were face down, ass up, in Tony's bedroom. We never found out what happened to those skinwalkers, or us for that matter. We had a series of ceremonies that were used to protect us from the sickness that the skinwalkers placed upon us. The medicine man told us that the people who did this were after us because of jealousy. They were jealous of us because of all the things we have and all the accomplishments we've done. So, we had their power turned around to backfire on them. After we had the ceremonies, Tony went back to his house, and his mom said that night, we just walked through the door about 1:30 a.m., got a glass of water, and went into my room. She also said we were quiet. She thought we were sleeping. To this day, we still hang out with each other. We still get water and take care of the livestock. We will never forget what happened that night. That's for sure. This happened when I was 12 or 13 years old. I live in southern Michigan, and a lot of strange things happen in these woods. So, little backstory here. My dad and I volunteered for a bird banding station. Bird banding is where a researcher catches a bird and puts a tiny numbered band on its leg to study its migration patterns. We were careful to not hurt the birds, so we set up mist nets to catch them, rather than a traditional trap. They were always released in the end. The lamb we banded on was owned by the head researcher, let's call him R. R's property was massive, with forest, marshlands, countryside, you name it. I loved to explore it while the banders were tagging birds. However, something happened that made me be more cautious when out in the woods alone. It was a slow summer morning, and I was walking through the forest enjoying the day. All of a sudden, I hear this wailing sound. It sounded like a distressed deer or even a cat. Being the big animal lover I was, I went looking for the wounded animal. It wasn't long before I came to the edge of the property. Something was wrong, however. The noise sounded much farther away than it did before. The woods around me were also completely silent. I happened to look to my left to see a hunter's blind. Once again, I got closer. I noticed something bizarre. It was badly torn on the sides, as if someone got a knife and sliced into it. Suddenly, I hear the same distant wailing sound again. So I did something stupid. I made the noise right back at the thing, hoping that whatever it was would show itself. Not even 5 minutes later, I hear this low growling noise just about 20 yards to my left. Even after wandering the woods for most of my life, I've never heard a sound like that before. I had to get out of there. I made a run for R's house, and it wasn't long before I came to his yard, and I stopped to catch my breath. All of a sudden, I hear the same low growl coming from the bushes less than 10 yards away, so I ran all the way up to the research shed to find R. It wasn't long before I told him what I had heard. I told him that possibly a deer had growled at me. He was a very scientific guy after all, and I doubted he believed me. But, in the back of my mind, I knew this was no deer. I believed that whatever this was trying to lure me off the property and do who knows what. A few days later, I learned about skinwalkers and how they mimicked animal sounds and even voices to lure people to their deaths. Although I luckily never saw this thing, I believe it was a skinwalker looking for its next victim.
In 2007, I was 18 years old and I grew up hearing all about the Michigan Dog Man, and I really didn't believe it. I played in the woods a lot as a young kid. One warm fall day, my boyfriend, myself, and 2 friends went out to see my grandmother at our family cabin. When we got there, my 2 younger cousins were there. They wanted to walk down to the river, so we all went, leaving my grandmother to have some alone time without the 2 young boys. As we walked up the hill, the boys wanted to race the 2 older boys. So, when we got to the start of the trail, going to the river, all 4 boys lined up, and I yelled, "Ready, set, go." As the boys ran down, us girls were yelling, "Run, faster, who's going to win?" Just then, a huge buck came out of nowhere. My boyfriend grabbed one of the young boys out of the way. I saw the buck and looked to see where it had come from. See, my family is very into hunting, and we hadn't been quiet by any means. This deer should have heard us long before we were close and ran off before we saw it. As I looked to where it came from, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like my brain and eyes were fighting to make sense of what was happening. A huge, black dog standing on 2 back legs was standing there. It looked like a man with a dog's head. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at my boyfriend. It then looked to be out of breath, like it had been running. I looked at my boyfriend and he was looking at it, but the others were watching the deer. When I looked back, I saw it run back down the hill. I ran up to my boyfriend. His eyes were wide and he looked at me. All he could say was, "Yes, I saw it too." The young boy and our 2 friends didn't see it, luckily, so we went to the river and back to the cabin. We left and my boyfriend really didn't want to talk about it. Later that night, some more of our friends came over and all the boys wanted to play Guitar Hero. As they played, I took a picture of them. Now my boyfriend and I live in a very old farmhouse. The windows are floor-to-ceiling windows, They're about 6, maybe 7 feet tall. In one of the pictures, you can see my dog laying on the floor asleep, and all the boys in the picture. Well, it was a week or two after the picture was taken, and my friend wanted to see other pictures I took that night. So I put them on my laptop. She was staring at them when she yelled for me and my boyfriend to come. She zooms in at the top corner of the window was a dog's face with its mouth open. We couldn't believe it. After she left, my boyfriend and I sat there looking at it. Had this thing found us or followed us? Was it mad about the deer? Maybe I'll never know, but it was terrifying. This story starts at my mom's place in Ohio. I was 11, and I've always believed in things like Bigfoot. At this point in time, I'm at my mom's house spending time with her, her boyfriend, and my brother. My parents being divorced, it was nice to finally get a week off to be able to go out and visit her. One morning, we all get up and go to Raccoon Park. My family is fishing there, when our dog, Rue, runs off. I go off in search of Rue, and while looking for him, I notice some boats. I grab Rue and return him to our family. My mom and I decide to take one of the boats onto the river. They aren't fancy, they're just those little pedal boats that you can rent. While pedaling, we decide to go to the other side of the bank, near a forest, to see if we can find some fish. As we got closer, we began to hear rustling in the trees. We didn't think much of it initially. We figured it was probably another person or maybe a raccoon or some other animal. Eventually, we narrowed down the possibility to an animal, as people weren't really in the area we were at. This was when something fell from the tree. We thought maybe a squirrel, but that's when we noticed there weren't any squirrels around. Then, out of the blue, a huge log flies by us and lands just super close to our boats. Freaking out, we immediately pedal away, back to the boathouse. As we were heading back, I looked behind me and noticed a 9-foot-tall hairy creature watching us from the trees on the bank. Shortly after, I noticed the creature. It darted off into the forest, never to be seen again. I initially thought I was hallucinating until some people in the park, on the bank, asked if I saw what was across the way while pedaling back. 2 weeks later, I'm video chatting my mom, and she mentions 2 guys took a pedal boat out by the area we were at. And while they were there, something attacked them from out of nowhere. They weren't hurt, more spooked, but they did get a decent glimpse of this creature. I'll never be sure what it was, but I'll always believe it was Bigfoot. This happened roughly a year ago. I have been hunting for 30 years, and in all that time I've never seen something like I saw on this day. I am quite familiar with the woods, and I have no problem handling myself. On this day, though, I've been hunting all morning, and it was about noon now. I was beginning to get this eerie feeling like I was being watched, but, even more so, stalked. I turned around slowly, and didn't see anything. The forest is normally alive with wildlife, and there is generally all sorts of noise. But, at this point anyway, there was absolutely nothing. No shrubbery moving, no birds chirping. It was deafening silence. I continued my hunt, watching closely, hoping to find a deer I could be proud of, a real trophy buck. What I found instead was far more scarier. Looking a short ways away, I almost didn't notice it at first, as it was so still. I saw something staring right at me. This beast, that I mistook for a deer before examining it more closely, stood at 7 foot, 4 inches tall, and his antlers looked like trees. It had the eyes of a cat, was completely silent, even when moving, and it simply just stared at me. Before I knew, I had heard a sound to my left. I looked over for a second and saw nothing, and looked back toward the figure only to realize it had vanished. Looking at my phone, I realized it was around 5. Looking at my phone, I realized it was around 5, when it was just noon moments ago. I was supposed to be in from hunting at 1 in the afternoon, but somehow, the time had flown by. I'm not sure what the thing I saw in the woods was, but I'm positive it wasn't a deer. I can't explain the missing time either. Any explanation would definitely be appreciated. Years ago, I used to backpack around the States. I was in New Mexico searching for elusive ditches and pools to skateboard. I got a few directions from locals, and it's free for all to find these places. Some are sketchy with crackheads and weirdos, and others are invite only. So I've been searching all day in Gallup. It's a solitary pool next to a trailer park. I speak with the owners, and they said it was cool for me to camp here. Just be inside your tent at night. I didn't ask why out of obliviousness and poor hearing. I thanked them and skate all day till dusk. I had a bottle of Jim Beam, and I was psyched about where I was as a self-reflection. Little did I know I'd be terrified later that night. I'm getting hammered and singing songs and laughing. Suddenly, I hear a loud scream. It was like when you're angry and spaz out when skateboarding. It sounded like my voice, as I slammed earlier, like it was me, but tinny, like speaking in a fan, like that hollow and echoey sound. I had heard of skinwalkers, but assumed it was a Native American boogeyman as I am white. I had no idea it would be real. I stayed in my tent most of the night. However, I did hear scurrying about, mouth-breathing smells of rotten meat and snorting, like it was sniffing the area. I asked the owners the next day what the hell that thing was. They said, "Oh, you heard them?" They did a protective ritual and put up a talisman for warding them off. They told me of others who skate this spot having had very similar experiences. However, I won't be going anywhere near that spot anytime soon. I will conclude with this. I am an adventurous type and a daredevil at heart. That said, I've been through way too much in the city to mess with supernatural entities. I'd take stabbings, robbery, being shot twice, mangled by a friend on flocka and bath salts, and getting jumped any day. I would rather face those sketchy human moments than skinwalkers, as I've won some and lost some. But, in my experience reading these stories online, I don't think skinwalkers lose too often. My friend and I were hanging out one night when we decided to go into the woods. While searching around, we noticed that all the sounds of wildlife has suddenly disappeared. This is usually a sign a predator is in the area. We walked slowly and carefully as we wandered the forest. Suddenly, we see this tall, lanky figure in the distance, with patches of brown fur. It looked too large to be a human. There was something off about it. We waited to see what it'd do next, when we suddenly noticed it was looking in our direction. Freaked out by this, we hid in some nearby bushes, staying as still as possible. The creature slowly moved by, and when it got really close, I thought we were going to die for sure. Thankfully, a few minutes went by, the longest few minutes of our lives, and whatever this creature was, decided to move on. We waited together, slightly till we were sure the coast was clear. After this, we booked it home and locked the door behind us. We were scared but grateful to be safe. My friend tried to get footage of the creature, but when trying to film it, the creature had a strange distortion and froze up. It hasn't worked since, and my camera is more than likely busted. Ever since this incident, I always hear strange whistling noises and odd sounds through my neighborhood and from the woods. Only late at night, though.
I'm 13 and I just moved to a rural area in Holland with my family. Even as a child, I was never your typical girl. I was quite tomboyish and even would play with worms, mud, and at times even dead animals. Now, though, I had 4 acres of wooded area to explore, so my German shepherds and I were very excited. After dinner one night, I told my parents I was taking the boys out back to play. The first thing I did was let Max and Riley do their business near the house, and then off we went to explore. Around the side of the garage was a cornfield. We walked alongside this until we reached a dirt mound. I chose to climb over this, but Max and Riley decided using the cornfield was the best route into the woods. Once an opening in the field appeared, my 2 dogs would join me. Upon arrival in the woods, I made sure to keep Max close as he would defend me. Riley, on the other hand, was a big baby and would run at the first sight of anyone new, so I left him on his own devices. Anyway, the boys and I continued deeper into the woods. Inside, there was a huge hill you could see from my house, and the boys and I began climbing it. When we reached the top, we chilled for a bit while Max played with the rock and Riley darted around paranoidally. I had heard things about goatmen and other cryptids, but being a seeing is believing type of person, I wasn't worried about that sort of thing while out in the woods. After our short break, I decided to climb down the hill and head back to feed my neighbor's chickens. As I'm climbing down, I tell Max to follow us, and as I turn my head to the right, I notice a tall grass is now moving. The realization that both my dogs are to the left of me hits hard, and I quickly scramble out of there. My dogs, knowing something was up, follow close behind me without even having to ask. I'm spooked by all this, and, be sure, as I type this out, decided against a normal policy of leaving my blinds open when I crash at night. Something strange while running. I looked back and I noticed that these things that were coming out of the bushes seemed to be similar to what these things that are called melonheads are. They're supposed to roam the rural areas around Allegheny County. I don't know if that was for sure it, but I'll never go out in those woods alone again, just in case it was those melonheads. I don't know if they're evil or not, but the stories are definitely creepy. I live in England, and this story happened to me when I was somewhere between 10 to 12 years old. My family and I were on the way back from taking my brother's friend home, and since we had our dog Mickey, we decided to take a shortcut through the woods. Shortly after heading into this small forested area, my dad and brother went on ahead, leaving my mom, our dog Mickey, and I behind to walk on our own. The forest, as I said before, wasn't exactly the biggest. It was a small area that I believe was used as a community area after someone used it for their garden. A few minutes into the walk, and talking about our days, my mom and I realized we could hear something behind us. Looking back, we initially saw nothing, and thought nothing really of it, although it was pitch black outside at this point, and the only real lights came from the occasional car that would meander down the main road a little ways after. After waiting a few more minutes, we finally decided it was probably just an animal, and turned and continued on our walk. After a bit of walking, though, we began to hear voices. Creeped out, we sped up to my dad and brother. Mickey had been barking and feeling very weird. The entire feel of the forest was just so unnerving at this point. The voices we heard were definitely not adult, and we can't imagine kids being out so late. We eventually got out of the forested area and decided it'd be better to go back on a normal day. There's something out there, and I'm not going back to find out what. So I live in a very wooded area. I'm a 21-year-old female, and I live with my grandparents and 2 of my brothers on the very top of a huge mountain with nothing but trees on all sides. Now, I have lived here since I was able to walk, and I know these woods like the back of my hand. When I was little, my brothers and I basically lived in these hills from sunrise to sunset. We found some pretty cool things and have been freaked out a few times from coyotes and snakes. A few months ago, we saw something that still gives me goosebumps just from riding it. Honestly, I don't have a clue what it was, and we haven't seen it since. But like I said, our house sits on a huge mountain, and there is a decent-sized field right below our house, and we can see the whole field from our porch. My brother and I walked out on the porch at around 11 p.m. to smoke a cigarette, since our grandparents don't allow it in the house. It was just starting to rain, and you could hear the crickets and all the little creatures at night, and I absolutely loved it. So, we're sitting on this porch just talking, smoking, and listening to the rain, and all at once, everything stopped. And I mean everything stopped, except a small constant drop of water. The best way I can describe the dripping was that it was an echo and remained constant, like it never sped up or slowed down. My brother looked over to me because he heard the sound too, so we stood up to look around for the source of the sound, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from, and my brother tapped me on the shoulder and whispered, "What the hell was that?" I turned over to see where he was pointing, and I saw it down in the field. It was easy to see because I walked right into the middle of the moonlight. It was huge. I say about 7.5 feet tall at least. It was kinda hunched over and walked on 2 legs. Its skin was very pale and it didn't look like it had fur or anything, but a white light shimmered from it brighter than the moonlight. It walked like it was in slow motion, and then it just stops and looks directly at us. It didn't even have facial features, but we could both feel its stare somehow. It never moved, and I've never ran so fast in my life. We hightailed it into the house, but when we looked out the window, it was going back into the woods. We haven't seen it since, but last night my brother heard the dripping noise from his bedroom. That's what made me want to write this. I just want to know what this thing is. I don't believe we're endangered though, because there was a time for it to attack, it would have been that night. If you know what this is, I'd really appreciate knowing.
Nine years ago, I was living on the island of Maui with my family. I took the family dog for a walk pretty late one night since he was restless. It was dark out, so I stuck to the sides of the street. Near the lampposts, my dog stopped and sniffed, so I assumed he had to use the restroom and I waited. I looked around, obviously not wanting to watch him go to the bathroom. While I was looking around in the neighbor's yard, I saw what looked to be a person hunched over, digging. The neighbors had many beautiful plants along their fencing, so I assumed maybe someone was doing late-night gardening. Odd, but so was me being out at like 11 or so walking the dog. I watched, wondering if I should offer help. The person stopped and just stayed there, hunched over. They were very frail, with grossly disproportionately long arms and legs, and I realized that they were naked. It was, as I mentioned, very dark out. They were hairless and still facing towards the home. Their skin was very pale, with a slight, peachy orange color reflecting onto them when the porch light turned on. I thought maybe I was imagining things, but I looked down at my dog again and he was staring over towards it too. I stepped back quietly and hurried him away, checking over my shoulder every now and then. It did not follow us. I don't know if it was really some nutty old person, a fleshgate or something like that. We'd moved very far away, and I think about it every now and then.
The following story happened when I was 10. It has remained in the back of my mind and in dreams for years after. As a kid, I'd often stack my toys on my windowsill and play with them. My window looked out to the front lawn, and I always loved the view. I also was a nosy kid, so I kind of liked seeing what was going on outside. Something about watching the neighbors go about their daily routines just made me feel safe, and I really did enjoy it. Sometimes, when bored, I'd even watch the animals we had around the area. The window I speak of was pretty big. It had a screen between the window and outside as well, which helped keep the cats from jumping out, as I'd often keep the window open, much like I had it today. On that day in question, I was just chilling in front of the window, reading, and also people watching and snooping where I could. As I'm reading, I suddenly get the sense something's watching me. Looking up, I see something standing there. It had the body of a man, the head of a jackal, and looked like a twisted version of Anubis for a lack of better visual. This thing would just stand there, watching me, a sinister smile on its face as it did. I remember his ears were extremely pointed and would stick up as though he were on alert. I was frozen in place, afraid as the thing stared at me. This lasted for what seemed like an eternity before the thing finally lumbered off into a wooded lot next door. Once I was able to move again, I rushed for the front door to see if I could get a better view of the thing. To my surprise, it had simply disappeared. After this day, I never left my window open again. I kept the blinds closed, and even today, I keep the black curtains over them, refusing to look outside my window again. I'm still unsure of what that thing was, but it felt quite predatory. I'm just grateful I never saw it in person again, and I hope I never do. If any of you possibly have any idea what this thing could have been, I would love to know. It's the fall of 2017, and my son and I camped in the mountains so we could be there the moment bow season started. We built a small, two-man structure to set in for the night. We then began eating and chilled. Around midnight, we decided it was best to go ahead and hit the sack. Just as we are about to enter our structure, we hear footsteps heading in our direction from the left hillside. 5 minutes pass and we stop hearing what we decide is likely a bear passing through. We crash, and an hour later, we awake to the sound of crashing through the underbrush. We both stared breathlessly in the direction of the crashing, waiting to see a sign of what might be out there. We didn't so much as utter a word while waiting. Soon enough, we see a light cresting over the ridgetop. My first light is, okay, this is someone with a spotlight coming towards us. That's when the light faded, and then reappeared, but this time it was a different color. It went from white to blue, and went out once more. Chills went down my spine as we began moving around for a better look at whatever this thing was. It soon went through the trees, and as it did, it suddenly gained speed and was gone. After a half hour, we gained the confidence and nerve to check out the area it had been in, and also where it had gone. There wasn't a single footprint, even as so much as a disturbed leaf. I'm not sure what this was, but since it first happened, we've experienced many other things just like this. I've heard of things like the lights in the woods, but I never believed in such things. Until now, of course.
My grandpa was telling me a story in the summertime, and I guess I never felt the need to share because I didn't know a platform to share it on existed. But now, I've found one in the form of your show and would love to share it. I apologize if some details are left out. I have forgotten some things that he has told me, such as names and what year it happened in. I believe it happened in the 60s. It happened near the Sandy Bay Aboriginal Reserve, which is in southern Manitoba. It was midwinter, and Manitoba gets plenty of snow. My grandpa told me and his two friends, a wife and husband, were walking from their car to their house carrying all of their luggage. It was just their cabin, not their house, so they were carrying the luggage up to the cabin. The first thing they noticed was a bright light shining into the cabin. It illuminated the entire cabin and was a fluorescent shade of icy blue. The husband thought he saw the silhouette of a strange, tall humanoid in the room. It was lanky and very tall, standing alone before it walked out of sight. Quickly, he ran into the house with his wife. They searched the house and there was nothing, so the wife went back out and grabbed more luggage. The husband said he heard a shriek from outside and quickly ran out to make sure she was okay. He was shocked to find her footprints leading up to the car, yet she was about 25 feet away from the car in the woods, with no tracks leading towards her. If she were to walk out there herself, her tracks would be obviously there. He ran out to her. She was distraught and hollering and screaming, and her eyes were glazed over. He took her in and she refused to speak. She was admitted to a mental hospital soon after, and to this day, she has the same glossed over eyes. She still can't speak. She experienced a horrible trauma out there, and I believe it's because of whatever the humanoid creature was. My grandpa still talks to her husband sometimes. I believe he visited her about 30 years ago at the hospital, since he doesn't live too many hours away. If anyone has any theories about this, feel free to let me know in the comments. If there are any more questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
When I was about 10 years old, my cousin who was 8 at the time and cousin who was 9 all stayed with me in my grandparents' house one night. My cousins lived at the end of the country, so we didn't see him very often, and he has some kind of social difficulties. He is awkward and has never been diagnosed, and was very needy compared to me and my brother. We were all staying in my grandmother's spare room, which had 2 twin beds, which my brother and cousin slept in at one end of the rectangular-shaped room, while I was on the air mattress at the other end of the bedroom, which was directly opposite the bedroom door. My cousin got up whining. He was scared at the dark, and my grandma came upstairs and told him to go back to bed. She left the light on and the door halfway open, at which point we went back to bed. I remember being able to hear the TV downstairs, and my cousin was restless. I was awake but just tried to sleep. Not long later, I remember because I was still awake, I saw through the very dimly lit bedroom what I can only describe as a goblin or dwarf or something. It was only about 2 feet in height. Smack the end of my cousin's head. I saw the silhouette of it run from the bedroom. It didn't move the door, it just sort of maneuvered through the opening. I remember hearing its footsteps as it ran out. I absolutely froze and just laid there, uncertain of what I saw for a moment. My heart was racing and my feet and palms were sweating, but I just froze. Seconds later, to my horror, my cousin got up, put the light on, and walked downstairs to see my grandma, complaining that something had banged on his head. The whole time I lay on the air mattress, not wanting to believe what I saw, I just saw my cousin whining, and it confirmed it to me. My grandmother came up and told him to stop being silly and go to bed. I didn't say a word, but I know what I saw. 20 years later, I could still remember the whole thing. My brother was fast asleep throughout. My grandma still lives in the house now. I have had some night terrors in that house when I was little, but other than that, I don't find anything particularly supernatural about it. They've never experienced anything like it before or since. I spoke about it with a friend years later, and they said maybe it was a house demon. I'm honestly very unsure myself.
This following story is my father's. Every other summer, he and some friends go bass fishing in Maine. This particular encounter they had happened around 2 or 3 in the morning. My dad left his tent having to go to the bathroom. As he was relieving himself, he heard a snap about 25 feet away from him. Looking up, he saw nothing initially. There was no animal or human in sight, and things were eerily quiet, as he puts it. There were no sounds in the forest as there normally would be. Still, wanting to be sure there wasn't some sort of animal out there that could be a threat, he shined his flashlight into the distance. It was then he saw a pair of eyes in a heavily wooded area. He was too far away to tell exactly how far off the ground they were, so he headed towards the set of eyes. As he did so, whatever was in the woods ran off with a fury. While it was running, my dad was able to get a much better glimpse of it in the clearing. He said it stood no less than 8 feet tall and had an awful smell emanating from it, almost skunk-like. My dad believes it was a Bigfoot, and although he told his friends about the experience the next day, they all agreed to stay the rest of the week together. He had no way to know for sure, but my dad believes it was a curious Bigfoot and wasn't too much of a threat. He didn't feel like it was trying to hurt him, and if it wanted to, it easily could have, right? What are your guys' thoughts on this encounter?